Finally the day arrived. Felix, Agatha, and Safie had gone for a long walk. I plucked up my courage and knocked on the cottage door. "Who is there?" said the old man. "Pardon me if I am disturbing you," I said. "I am a traveler who needs to rest a little. May I sit for a few minutes by the fire?" He invited me to sit by the fire and warm myself. I went in and sat down and started to talk. It was wonderful to be with another human being. We talked for some time, and I was just about to tell him who I really was when the cottage door opened and Felix, Agatha, and Safie came in. I cannot describe their horror on seeing me. Agatha fainted, Safie screamed and ran out of the cottage, and Felix, in a fury, grabbed me, threw me to the ground, and hit me with a stick. I could have killed him on the spot, but I stopped myself. Filled with pain and despair, I left the cottage. I cursed the day that I had been created, and I cursed you for creating me. When night came, I left the hut and wandered through the forest, howling like a wild animal. It was the worst night of my life. I wanted to pull up the trees and destroy everything around me. I no longer wanted to exist. The morning came, and the sun calmed me. I decided that I had acted too quickly, and that I would return to my hut and try again. But the cottage was empty. The family had left. I never saw them again. I spent the rest of the day sitting in my hut, and for the first time I thought of revenge. I thought of the good, kind people and how they had rejected me. I waited until it was dark. Then I set fire to the cottage. There was a wind that night which helped the flames burn, and soon the cottage and garden were completely destroyed. I returned to the forest, wondering what to do. I remembered that you lived in Geneva. I had learned a little geography from listening to Felix's conversations with Safie, and so I decided to go to Geneva. You were the only person I could turn to, but even for you I only felt hate. I traveled only at night, because I was so frightened now at the idea of meeting another human being. But one day I found myself in a dark wood, and so I decided to carry on traveling, even though it was the middle of the day. I was resting when I heard a voice, and I saw a young girl running toward the river. Suddenly she slipped and fell into the water. I jumped in after her, and with great difficulty managed to save her. She was unconscious, and while I was trying to help her, a man appeared on the scene. He ran toward me, pulled the girl from my arms, and ran off with her into the trees. Then he turned around, aimed his gun at me, and fired. He shot me in the shoulder, and I fell to the ground in great pain. This was the result of my kindness. I spent several miserable weeks in the forest, until the wound was better, and then I set off again. 2 months later I reached Geneva. I was resting and wondering how I should approach you, when I saw a beautiful child running toward me. I thought to myself that perhaps an innocent child would not be filled with horror at my ugliness. As he passed, I seized his arm. As soon as he saw me, he screamed in terror. "I do not want to hurt you, child," I said. "I only want to be your friend." "Monster!" screamed the child, struggling violently. "Let me go! I don't want to be your friend. Let me go, or I'll tell Papa. He's Mr. Frankenstein, and he'll punish you." "Frankenstein! So you belong to my enemy!" In a sudden fury, I put my hands around the boy's throat, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. He was my first victim. I saw something shining around his neck. It was a gold chain with a picture of a woman on it. She was so beautiful that I pulled the chain from the boy's neck to have this woman for myself. With the chain in my hand, I ran to look for somewhere to hide for the night. I went into a barn, and to my surprise, I found a young woman there sleeping on some straw. As I bent over to look at her, she moved in her sleep. In my hurry to get away before she saw me, I dropped my precious chain. I hid in the area hoping to see you, and now I have found you. And I will not let you leave until you promise me one thing. I am alone and miserable. Nobody wants to be my friend. You must create a woman as ugly as I am. Such a woman will love me and will be happy to be my wife.
Chapter 10. The Promise. The monster stopped speaking and looked at me, waiting for my answer. I absolutely refuse to do such a thing, I said. You can do what you want to make my life miserable, but I will never create another being as unfortunate as yourself. Then if I cannot find love, I will cause fear, said the monster, and I will hate you forever. I will not rest until I have made your life as miserable and terrible as I can. All I ask for is a woman to love. It is true we will be monsters, and we will live separate from other human beings. Our lives may not be happy, but they will be harmless and free from the misery I feel now. You are my creator. Let me for once feel gratitude. Let me know that there is one person in this world who feels sympathy and understanding for me. I was moved by his words, and thought that there was some justice in them. The monster saw my change of heart and continued, If you agree, you will never see me again. We will go to South America and live among the trees and the animals. Nobody will ever see us again. How can I believe you? I asked. You have already killed. How can I know that it will not happen again? Do as I ask, said the monster, and I will not hate you for the rest of my life. I was full of mixed emotions. I felt sympathy for him, but when I looked at him, I saw a repugnant, hateful creature. I considered everything that he had said, and finally I replied, I agree to your request, but you must promise me that you will leave Europe forever and that you will never be seen again. I swear that I will do as you ask, cried the monster, and with these words he left me, afraid, perhaps, that if he stayed longer, I might change my mind. I saw him go down the mountain at great speed, and then he was out of sight. It was now evening, and I started my return journey, but my heart was heavy, and I walked very slowly. Night came, and I was only halfway. I spent a troubled night in the open air, and returned to Chamonix the next morning. I didn't rest and returned immediately to Geneva. The family was very alarmed at my wild appearance, but I would not answer their questions. I felt that I had no right to their love any more, but I feared for them and wanted to save them from harm. So I decided that I would have to keep my promise to the monster, even though the thought of it filled me with horror and disgust. Days and weeks passed, but I could not find the courage to begin my work. I could not bear to think of the months of preparation I would need before I could begin to create a woman for the monster. I heard of an Englishman who had made some new discoveries that might help me, and I thought of asking my father's permission to go to London, but I kept putting off making the request. I took long walks and passed whole days at the lake, and slowly my health improved, much to my father's delight. One day, my father called me to him and said, You know that I have always hoped that one day you would marry Elizabeth. Now I am worried that you have met someone else you want to marry. My dear father, do not worry, I replied. There is nothing I want more than to marry Elizabeth one day. I am glad to hear that, said my father. Our family has been through very difficult, sad times recently. Perhaps if you married Elizabeth now, it would bring us all a little happiness. I listened to my father in silence, and did not reply for some time. How could I marry Elizabeth before I had finished the horrible task ahead of me? I could not carry out my work in my father's house because there might be an accident, and they would learn my terrible secret. I had to go to England to meet the man who had made the discoveries which would help me. So I told my father that I wanted to go to England, but without, of course, telling him the real reasons why. My father was delighted to see that I felt well enough to make a journey and immediately gave me his permission. It was decided that I would be away for a few months, at most a year. My father did not want me to go alone, so without telling me, he and Elizabeth arranged for Henry Clerval to go with me. I was very happy that Henry would be with me at the start of my journey, but I worried that his presence would interfere with the solitude I needed to create the monster's companion. And so I set off for England. It was decided that I would marry Elizabeth as soon as I got back to Geneva. My father did not want to wait any longer because of his age, and for my part, the thought of marrying Elizabeth would keep me going during the difficult months ahead. The only thing that worried me was that during my absence my family would be unprotected from the monster, who might be angered by my departure. But he had promised to follow me wherever I went, so I hoped that he would follow me to England. I left Switzerland at the end of September, and soon I arrived in Strasbourg, where I spent 2 days waiting for Clerval. What a contrast there was between us! I was full of dark, miserable thoughts, while he was full of life and pleasure at all the wonderful sights that we saw during our journey by boat up the river Rhine to Rotterdam in Holland, from where we sailed to England. Chapter 11. England. We had been in London for several months when we received an invitation from an old friend in Scotland to visit his country. I had learned all I could from the scientists in London, and so I decided to accept. We spent 3 months traveling through England until we finally arrived in Scotland. I had neglected my work for some time now, and I was worried that the monster might be angry and take revenge on my family. This thought stopped me from enjoying the beautiful scenery of Scotland and the hospitality of my friend. I finally told Clerval that I wished to continue on my own. I told him that I would meet him in a month or two, and that I hoped that I would be in a happier mood when I returned. Henry tried to change my mind, but he saw that I had made my decision. I wanted to find a remote part of Scotland and finish my work in solitude. I found an isolated spot on one of the Orkney Islands. There was an empty hut there with 2 rooms. I made one of the rooms into a place to live, and the other into my laboratory. I worked during the day, and in the evenings I walked by the sea and thought of Switzerland. Living like this, in complete isolation, I became nervous and restless. Every moment I was afraid of meeting the monster. But I continued, and soon my work was quite advanced. I looked forward to finishing it with a mixture of hope and the strange feeling that something evil was going to happen. Chapter 12. The Promise is Broken. One evening after dark I stopped working, as there was not enough light. I sat in my laboratory thinking, what if the woman I created was even more evil than the monster? What if she refused to live in isolation with the monster? What if she decided to leave her ugly partner and look for a more attractive man? What if they had children? For the first time, I realized the wickedness of my promise. Suddenly, in the moonlight, I saw the monster at the window. He had followed me and had come to see my progress and to claim his partner. I looked at his horrible face and I thought that I must have been mad to promise to create another being like him. Trembling with anger, I tore my work to pieces and promised myself that I would never resume it. The monster gave a howl of despair and burst into the room to confront me. "You have destroyed the work which you began. You are breaking your promise to me. I suffered exhaustion, cold, and hunger to follow you here. Remember that I have the power to make your life completely miserable. Yes, I am breaking my promise. I will never create another creature like yourself. Your threats do not frighten me. Leave me." The monster saw the determination in my face, and his face filled with anger. "Every man has someone to love except me. he cried. "You will not be happy while I am alone and miserable. I will have my revenge. I will go now, but remember this. I will be with you on your wedding night." I leaped forward and tried to seize him, but he escaped and ran from the house. A few moments later, I saw him in his boat, sailing rapidly across the water, and then he disappeared from sight. It was silent in the room, but his words sounded in my head. I would die on my wedding night. I was not afraid, but when I thought of Elizabeth and how sad she would be, my eyes filled with tears, and I cried for the first time in months. The next day, I was sitting by the sea when I saw a fishing boat arrive. One of the men brought me a package. It contained a letter from Clerval, saying that he had to return to London before setting out for India. He asked me to join him before he left Scotland. I decided that I would leave the island 2 days later. But before I left, there was one thing that I had to do. I had to pack up my chemical instruments. The thought made me shiver, but early the next morning I found the courage to enter the room and collect my instruments. The remains of the half-finished creature lay on the floor. I realized that I could not leave them there for the islanders to find, so I put them all into a basket filled with heavy stones, and I decided that I would drop them into the sea late that night. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, I took the basket, got into my little boat, and sailed out to sea. As soon as the moon was covered by a cloud and everything was dark, I threw the basket and its contents into the water. I heard it fall, and then I sailed away. The noise of the waves put me to sleep, and when I woke up it was morning. A strong wind had blown my boat off course, and I had no idea where I was. I was frightened at the thought that the wind might blow the boat into the Atlantic Ocean, so I sailed on until I saw land to the south of me. I landed, and I was tying up the boat when I realized that I was surrounded by people. They did not offer to help me, but whispered to each other in a rather alarming way. I realized that they were speaking English and said, "My good friends, please tell me the name of this town and where I am." "You will know that soon enough," replied one of the men. "You have come to a place that you might not like very much. In Ireland, we do not like criminals." I was very surprised to hear this rude answer, and also at the angry faces of the people around me. I was about to walk away, when an unpleasant-looking man said to me, "Come, sir, you must follow me to Mr. Kerwin, the magistrate, and explain the death of a gentleman who was murdered here last night." The information startled me, but I soon recovered. I was innocent, that could be proved quite easily. Although I was almost dropping with exhaustion and hunger, I followed the man to Mr. Kerwin. Chapter 13. The Accusation. Mr. Kerwin seemed a calm, gentle man, but he looked at me very severely. The witnesses came forward. One man said that he had been out fishing in the night with his son, but the wind had become very strong and they went back to land. It was very dark, and as he was walking along the sand, his foot hit against something. It was the body of a dead man. They thought that someone had drowned, but the clothes were not wet. They carried the body into town. It was the body of a handsome young man, about 25 years old. He had probably been strangled because there was no sign of violence, except for the black fingerprints on his neck. When the fingerprints were mentioned, I remembered the death of my brother and became very perturbed. The magistrate saw my reaction and he thought it was because I was guilty. The man's son then said that he had seen a boat with a single man in it a short distance from the beach. He said that he thought it was the same boat in which I had just landed. A woman who lived near the beach said that she had seen a boat with one man in it push off from that part of the beach where the body was found. Hearing all the evidence, Mr. Kerwin said that I should be taken into the room where the body lay to see the effect it had on me. I went into the room and looked at the body. The lifeless form of Henry Clerval lay in front of me. I can still feel the horror of that moment. I threw myself on the body of my friend and exclaimed, "Have I also murdered you, my dear friend? I have already been responsible for 2 deaths, but you, my friend, my—" I fell to the floor unconscious and was carried from the room. A strong fever followed. I lay ill for 2 months, almost on the point of death. I heard afterwards that my ravings were terrifying. I called myself the murderer of William, of Justine, and of Clerval. I felt the monster's fingers around my neck and screamed aloud. Fortunately, as I spoke in German, only Mr. Kerwin understood me, but my screams frightened other people. I woke up as if from a dream 2 months later in a miserable prison cell. One day, while I was recovering, Mr. Kerwin came to see me. He looked at me kindly and started to speak. "I hope that the sympathy of a stranger may help you a little," he said. "It was awful for you to land in a strange country when the first thing that you saw was the body of your murdered friend." I was surprised that he knew so much about me. He told me that after I had fallen ill, he had asked to see the papers I had with me to try to find out who I was. He had found some letters among the papers, including one from my father, and had written to Geneva to tell them what had happened. "Your father came immediately," he said. "He is here to see you now." I was overjoyed to see my father and to learn that everyone in Geneva was safe and well. A month later, I was taken to court for trial. It was proved that I was on the Orkney Islands at the time the body of my friend was discovered, and I was set free. My father was delighted at the result of the trial, but I could not share his feelings. I could only see 2 eyes staring at me. Sometimes they were the eyes of Henry. Sometimes they were the watery eyes of the monster. My father talked to me of Geneva and Elizabeth and Ernest, but nothing he said could comfort me. I had to return to Geneva without delay to look after the people I loved and to lie in wait for the monster. My father did not think I was well enough to travel, but I insisted, and soon we were on our way. We sailed to Le Havre in France, and then traveled to Paris. Before we left Paris on our way to Switzerland, I received a letter from Elizabeth. She told me how happy she was that I was better, and that she would see me very soon. But she also wrote that she was troubled. She reminded me that my parents had always hoped that we would marry. She loved me and wanted to be my wife, but the thought had crossed her mind that perhaps I loved someone else. If I did, I must tell her. I must not feel obliged to honor my parents' wishes. She would be happy to remain my sister and dear friend. All she wanted was my happiness and good health. Elizabeth's letter reminded me of the monster's threat. "I will be with you on your wedding night." The monster planned to kill me that night. I would fight with him. If I won, I would be free. If I lost, I would also be free. I did not fear death. Death was less terrible to me than the loss of Elizabeth. There was no point in delaying our marriage. If I did so, the monster might find an even more abominable method of revenge. I wrote an affectionate letter to Elizabeth and told her that I loved her and wanted to marry her as soon as I returned to Geneva. I also said that I had a terrible secret that I would tell her the day after our wedding day, but until that day, she must never mention it. About a week after that, we returned to Geneva. Chapter 14. The Wedding. Elizabeth welcomed me with love, but there were tears in her eyes when she saw how thin I was. She had also changed. She was thinner, and sadness had marked her face. But she was still the gentle, sweet Elizabeth whom I loved. Soon after our return to Geneva, my father spoke about my immediate marriage to Elizabeth. We decided that if she agreed, the ceremony would take place in 10 days. The day of the wedding came nearer. I was very nervous, but I covered up my feelings with an appearance of gaiety and happiness that delighted my father. Elizabeth waited for the day with calmness and pleasure, mixed with a little apprehension. After the ceremony, there was a large party at my father's house. Elizabeth and I were going to spend our honeymoon at Lake Como. We left the party and made our way by boat to Evian, where we would spend the night and continue our journey the next day. Those were the last moments in my life that I was happy. As the boat sailed along the water to Evian, I took Elizabeth's hand, and together we enjoyed the beautiful scenery. But Elizabeth's mood kept changing. One moment she was happy, the next she was quiet and lost in thought. We arrived in Evian later that evening. The sun set as we landed, and the wind, which had been quite strong, changed to a light breeze. As I climbed ashore, I had a strong sense of imminent danger. Chapter 15. Revenge. It was 8 o'clock when we landed. We walked for a short time on the shore, and then went to our hotel and admired the lovely view. The wind became quite violent, and suddenly there was a heavy rainstorm. I had been calm all day, but as soon as it became dark, 1,000 fears came into my mind. I was anxious and watchful. I kept my hand on a gun which I had hidden inside my jacket. Every sound terrified me. Elizabeth saw my agitation. "What is the matter, Victor?" she asked, trembling. "What are you afraid of?" "Be calm, my love," I replied. "Everything will be fine, but I fear that tonight will be dreadful, really dreadful." I thought that the struggle I would have with the monster would be terrifying for my wife, so I told her to go to bed. I decided I would not join her until I knew where the creature was. She left me, and I walked through the hotel, inspecting every corner where my enemy might be hiding. Suddenly, I heard a loud, dreadful scream coming from Elizabeth's room. I realized the horrible truth, and I stood there like stone, unable to move. There was a second scream, and I rushed into the room. Elizabeth lay across the bed, lifeless, her head hanging down, and her pale, terrified face half hidden by her hair. How blind, how stupid I had been! Of course, this was the monster's revenge. Only this way could he cause me the suffering I have lived with from that moment day and night. That last image of my beloved Elizabeth is engraved on my mind and my soul. I embraced her lifeless form, crying with grief and despair. The murderer's fingerprints were on her neck, and the Elizabeth that I loved was no longer with me. I looked up, and there, at the open window, I saw the monster's face. I ran to the window, pulled the gun from my jacket, and fired, but he escaped and jumped into the lake below. At the noise of the gun, people rushed into the room. I pointed to the place where the monster had disappeared, and they started to follow his tracks. They searched the whole night, but he was never found. I tried to help them, but I fell down exhausted and was carried back to the hotel and placed in bed. Suddenly I thought of my father and Ernest. Perhaps the monster had already killed them too. The thought made me tremble all over, but brought me back to my senses. I decided that I had to return to Geneva right away. I kissed Elizabeth for the last time and left. There were no horses, so I set off on foot. The wind was strong and it was pouring with rain. I could not bear to think of Elizabeth and the happiness I had lost, and the tears streamed down my face. I arrived in Geneva. My father and Ernest were still alive, but the news I brought broke my father's heart. He died a few days later in my arms. Now, it was my turn to think of revenge. I went to a local magistrate and told him the whole story. I asked him to do everything necessary to capture the monster. At the beginning of my story, the magistrate obviously did not believe me, but as I went on, an expression of horror came over his face, and he listened more carefully. He was not convinced that it was possible to catch a creature that could cross seas of ice and live in places that no man could reach. So I made the only decision possible. I resolved to search for the monster myself, and once I found him, I would kill him. Chapter 16. The Hunt. From that time on, I have thought of nothing but revenge, and the need to put an end to the horror. The night before I left Geneva, I went to the cemetery where my victims are buried. Filled with rage, I knelt by their graves and swore that I would avenge their deaths. In the quiet of the night, I heard a loud laugh, and a familiar voice said, "I am satisfied. You have decided to live, and I am satisfied." I ran toward the voice, but he was not there, and in the moonlight I saw the giant figure running away. I pursued him, and have been pursuing him now for many months, but he always escapes. I have followed him to France and across the Mediterranean. I saw him hide on a ship going to the Black Sea, so I sailed on the same ship, but again he escaped. I followed him to Russia, and there the peasants, terrified by his appearance, told me which route he had taken. Sometimes he himself left clues. I have traveled through rain and snow, heat and cold. I have often been exhausted, hungry, and thirsty. Sometimes food is given to me. Sometimes I eat the meat of wild animals. Often my enemy has written mocking messages on trees and stones for me to read. This has only increased my anger and made me even more determined to find him. Some weeks ago I obtained a sled and dogs to travel over the snow and ice more quickly. I did not know how my enemy was traveling, but I knew that I was beginning to catch up with him. When I first saw the ocean, he was only 1 day ahead of me. He had arrived in a small village and had taken their store of winter food. He put it on a sled and went toward the sea. I bought a good supply of food for myself and followed him. This was 3 weeks ago. When my enemy was almost in my hands, I lost him once again, and more completely than before. There was a kind of earthquake, but at sea. The wind rose and the sea crashed around me with a tremendous roar. In a few minutes there was a stormy ocean between me and my enemy, and I was left floating on a piece of ice that was getting smaller and smaller. In this way I spent many terrifying hours. Several of my dogs died, and I thought that my end had come. Then I saw your ship, and I was saved. But I am dying, and I have not yet finished my task. If I die before I find him, Walton, you must promise me that he will not escape. I do not ask you to continue my hunt with all its difficulties, but if he appears to you after I am dead, promise me that he will not live. Do not listen to his words. He speaks well and will try to persuade you, but do not trust him. Remember William, Justine, Clerval, Elizabeth, and my father, and kill him for me.
Epilogue. It took Frankenstein a week to tell Robert Walton his story. By the end of the week, the ship and its crew were surrounded by mountains of ice and were in great danger. The crew made Walton promise that if they ever managed to get off the ice, they would not continue their voyage, but would return to England. Although he was disappointed, Walton agreed. Frankenstein became progressively weaker and barely had the strength to talk. Before he died, he begged Walton once again to kill the monster for him, given the opportunity. "I no longer feel the need for revenge, and I no longer hate him," he said. "But he must die. I created him and had a duty toward him, but I also have a duty to my family and friends. I was right to refuse to create a wife for him, but he has killed the people I loved, and I do not know if his wish for revenge is over. It was my task to destroy him, and I have failed. I ask you now to finish my work for me." As he spoke, his voice became weaker and weaker, and a few hours later, Victor Frankenstein drew his last breath. The ice finally began to melt, and Walton and his crew set sail for England. One night, about midnight, Walton heard strange sounds coming from the cabin where Frankenstein still lay. He went into the cabin and saw a terrifying sight. A gigantic figure with a most horrible face was bending over Victor. To Walton's surprise, his expression was one of anguish. "You are also my victim," he cried to the dead man. "I have destroyed you and everyone you loved. Why did you have to reject me? All I wanted was the company of other people and someone to love. I wanted to be happy. You refused me this, so I did what I did. But I am miserable." Walton felt some sympathy listening to the monster, but he remembered Victor's dying words. The monster looked up and spoke to Walton. "The world has not treated me fairly. I wanted love and friendship, but everyone has rejected me. You hate me, but you do not hate those who have treated me so badly. Why do you not hate Felix, who beat me so cruelly? Why do you not hate the man who tried to kill me after I rescued his child from the lake? I know I have done terrible things. I have killed people who had never harmed me, and now I have killed my creator. Do not be afraid that I will kill others. My own death is the only task that remains for me now. I shall leave your ship by the same means I arrived. I shall find the most northerly part of the world, and there I will die. Maybe death will bring me peace." With these last words, he jumped from the cabin window onto the ice which lay close to the ship. Walton watched as the man was carried away by the waves and lost in the darkness.